That's what I tell people all the time. Security is different than IT. So the dearth of cybersecurity talent is very well noted. I've heard numbers between 2 and 4 million shortages here in the United States alone. So I tell companies, why go through that whole process? Why go through this whole hiring thing when the loss of a single body could have a dramatic impact on your network? And so even companies like Southwest, United Airlines are starting to look at outsourcing some of those cybersecurity services.
Welcome, everybody. Once again, you are about to get in the hole with Tech-Gofer. I'm Nick Mulholland, your host. I'm also the president of Tech-Gofer. And today, very excited to have someone that's been on the road with us a few times this year, which we've been glad to have, is James Morrison. He is the director of cybersecurity programs at one of great distributors that we work with, ScanSource. I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about his storied career with the FBI and some other things in the cybersecurity range. But James, thank you for being here. It's good to see you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I have enjoyed our events together, and anything I can help out and have a conversation with you all, I always enjoy it.
Yeah, no, you've been a heck of a speaker in front of all the guests that we've had across the U.S. And as we do, unfortunately, we were unable to get you some alcoholic beverages to imbibe on, but you were mentioning that you're a big Scotch fan. So tell me how you got into that and why you or what are you liking these days?
Just my heritage is Scottish. So, the Morrison clan, my branch came over the United States in the 1600s. But as I've gotten older and started sort of reaching back and discovering that, I figured I should make sure I'm exploring the beverages of my bonny homeland. So
Yep.
I went back to Scotland and took my son to Scotland a few years back, and I was already sort of dabbling, but of course just fell in love with the country. It's a beautiful country, great people. And really I went to like 6 different distilleries, 7 different distilleries, and tried the different styles of Scotch. I think a lot of people don't always understand that there are different styles of it, and really fell in love with the space side type Scotches. So
Yeah. Which cities did you go to while you were there?
I went to Edinburgh, spent about 4 days in Edinburgh, and then went up the east side of the mountains, to Inverness. Loved Inverness. Just a really pretty town. Just loved it. I could live there all my life. I'd probably enjoy that a lot. And then spent a couple days in Inverness, and then came back down through the Highlands, and visited some of the Scottish history points on that side, and I'm really looking forward to going back. I want to hit some of the islands.
Sure.
Isle of Skye is definitely on the list. Islay, and then my family came from the Isle of Lewis, so I think I've got to get out there and see what that looks like.
To say my last name Mulholland, it's very Irish and Scottish, and I had a good time in Edinburgh as well. That place is really cool. That might actually, I think I was there like 5 or 6 years ago. Might have been the last time that I've actually had Scotch, just because I feel like Scotch people, they really get into it, but for the vast majority, it's all bourbons. Everybody drinks bourbons now.
So I went out actually to the battlefield of Culloden. Of course, this is during the Outlander series, and my tour guide was actually an extra on the show Outlander, and so he dressed us up as Jacobites. We actually went out on the battlefield of Culloden, and my son and I had some sword fights and stuff, and then I bought a bottle that I told my Scottish friends I will only open if Scotland ever becomes free again. And so I have this little bottle of Scotch that I'm just holding off until they had just done the referendum, and they decided to stay with the UK, but that may change in the future.
Never know. And I think that it ages well anyway.
Never know. So
Well, that's awesome. Well, real quick for our viewers, I'm drinking a pretty difficult to find, very good Old Forester single barrel. Jason's favorite pick, in fact, at really cool. That was it from a Fox Cigar Bar, here in Scottsdale.
Yeah, I got a bottle of Old Forester, but I don't think it's that. It's definitely not that one. I brought one. I actually brought a couple bottles back for me from Scotland. I need to find them. Dalwhinnie. Really fell in love with the Dalwhinnie and just found some really good. Like they have one that's like a winter white Scotch, and it was just absolutely one of the smoothest Scotches I've ever had. And so definitely been looking for more of that. From the Outlander series, the main star actually has a blended Scotch that he's selling now called Sassenach, which is you can find it on the East Coast, but I haven't been able to find it in Texas yet.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I know you're going to be joining us for our event in Austin coming up soon. So hopefully, Fierce Whiskers, where I don't think you've been and we've not been to before, there'll be some interesting things for us to taste there.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people are either Scotch or bourbon, but as a lot of the distilleries started coming into Texas, I've started exploring some of the Texas bourbons, and so I can move pretty freely between the two different types of liquor.
Yeah, that is unique because I feel like for whatever reason, a lot of people I know, it's you drink whatever in your like 20s, then all of a sudden you get over 30, it's like, well, we drink bourbon now.
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth. When we go to the Renaissance Festival, in particular, they have a Scottish tasting booth at the Texas Renaissance Festival, but they also have a bourbon tasting. So I dabble in both and make sure I walk out of there, or sometimes have to be drug out, on my kilt.
And, we'll see how you fare at our event. These things do happen. Just kidding. Well, again, James, appreciate you being on. So, I think our listeners are very interested. Tell us about your background, which I mentioned the FBI early on, but I mean, you've got a very storied career. I'd love to hear a little bit of your background, and then, we'll kind of get into where you focus, what you do today, and why it's so valuable to, the potential customers that we meet.
Yeah, I mean, so 36 years ago, I joined the Air Force. I was, came out of high school, played a couple of years of college soccer, didn't really find a career there. And so I joined the Air Force and got lucky enough to end up in what at that time they called computer command and control, which we now call networks. And so built a lot of the early networks of the Air Force. Went into satellite communications and did a lot of satellite launch and early acquisitions, but they realized I had a little bit of a propensity for computers and networks in particular. And so they made me a system administrator of some of the first 10-base-2s, 10-base-T networks, Sun workstations, DEC Ultrix, all that kind of fun stuff. And I finished a degree in engineering and left the Air Force. Worked for Lockheed Martin for a year as a network engineer. Loved it. It was a very early, again, Sun Solaris network, but I really enjoyed the engineering aspect of it and didn't really like the contract I was working on, but decided that was kind of the path I wanted to move forward on. So a year later, I joined the FBI as an IT guy. Really, it wasn't a gunslinger, wasn't an agent. But I came in as an IT guy, helped build their networks, upgrade networks. We were in Novell at the time, so I did Novell and Windows sysadmin, and then actually moved over to the engineering side and built the network, engineered a lot of the networks, Cisco networks, cryptography, stuff like that. Well, in that career, the FBI, as cybercrime became more of a real problem in like 2010, 2011, the director at the time said, we need to have more technical bodies associated with cybercrime. And so they came to me and asked me if I would like to join. I said, absolutely. And I became one of the first 20 computer scientists that the FBI hired in 2012. And I was in class number 1. And I went back to Houston at the time and started working as a digital forensics expert, a reverse engineering malicious software expert, incident responder, and working cases all across the Houston area, including the St. Louis Cardinals intrusion into the Astros scouting database. So brought some technical expertise into that. And at that point, we were all doing nation state. It was Russia, China, Iran, and it was all very classified, and we were sort of chasing each other through the internet. But in 2013 and 14, it starts to change, right? We start to see cybercrime become more financially motivated. Target, eBay. And as cybercrime is changing, our message started to change where we needed to start get out in front of a lot of these attacks and talking to companies ahead of it. And it really was cybersecurity. So in 2014 and 2015, I was working with oil and gas companies in the Houston area, working with financial sector, working with power production. There's a nuclear power plant in South Texas. And just saying, listen, this is what the attacks are looking like. This is how we can defend ourselves. And I really became sort of a cybersecurity expert and did a lot of presentations at places like Texas Technology Summit, the offshore technology summits, and just starting to get awareness around why this was changing and what we needed to do to change our defenses. So I did that until I retired in 2019. I retired after 22 years in the FBI, 30 total government, and was hired by Hewlett Packard Enterprise as a technologist. And I had the same messaging, talking to companies about cybersecurity. And even though there really wasn't a cybersecurity message integral to HPE, there was a lot of security features built into some of their technologies. And so I kind of drove that conversation, things like Zerto, which is a disaster recovery product. But I did a couple years there and realized, I really wanted to do more. So I got my CISSP. I became a chief security officer for an MSSP. Did that for about 6 months and realized I needed to be more product agnostic. I don't feel comfortable necessarily selling one technology. And so the TSD Intelisys came to me and said, hey, we'd like you to create a security program and run it. And so I've been here about 2.5 years now. And it's really what I like about it is my role is to be a security consultant to customers in a product agnostic way. I'm not here to sell a particular product. I'm really here to help you have those conversations about where security should be and create a roadmap that gets you more secure. Because what I hate seeing, I say this all the time, I hate seeing somebody being hacked. It has a very visceral reaction for me because we're here in the United States trying to just make our money, do our thing, run businesses, and be successful. And these hackers are coming from outside the United States almost all the time and stealing money from us. And it's actually, I think it was many years ago, one of the directors of the FBI said, this is the largest theft of financial and intellectual property in the history of mankind. These people are stealing our stuff. They're causing us to have to pay a lot of money. And by 2025, next year, global cybercrime damages are over $10 trillion. That's a lot of money. So we've got to be better. And that's really why, man, for me, it's a little bit of a crusade. And so working with companies like Tech-Gofer, I want to have those conversations and help you understand the landscape better because cybersecurity is very muddled. If you look at, like, for example, just endpoint products, right? You have great products out there like, CrowdStrike and SentinelOne, but companies have no idea how to navigate that landscape. And so they're going to Google or they're going to an MSP that may not have a security focus, and they're buying products that may be good products, but they don't have the expertise to actually install and maintain. So I want to try to help companies find better solutions, cheaper solutions, but find those experts that can do it really well so they don't get exploited.
Yeah, and I feel like you kind of answered this question, but it's interesting listening to you about how your role has changed. So if I ask you point blank, what's your favorite part about cybersecurity and your role right now?
I like helping people. I mean, at the end of the day, I really feel the best about when I'm able to help a company sort of have that aha moment. So when I'm meeting with a customer and I'm like, hey, where are you at with security? And then I say, well, what about this? Have you thought about this? And they haven't. And as a CISO, I've been there. They are always very anxious about something bad happening when they're not there. They're terrified that they're going to go home on the weekend and come back to a ransomware attack or a data breach. And so what I really want to be able to do is help them sleep better. I mean, at the end, really at the end of the day, but I want them to be able to have a better feeling that they're taking positive, proactive actions to protect the network that they're responsible for. And so that's probably what I feel the best about is when I have one of those really good meetings, and that year later, we're able to look back and realize that, wow, they're a lot safer because of our actions.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've been told in cybersecurity, there's no silver bullet. Criminals are changing all the time. There could be, CrowdStrike is a very solid product. We've had a lot of clients that have had success, but they just recently had a problem where that affected some. Well, I was at the Minneapolis airport, and I can tell you there was a lot of people in lines as Delta was using them and didn't know how to properly manage it. So I agree with you.
And there's competing lawsuits there, and so there's like there's a $500 million lawsuit between Delta and then the countersuit back from both Windows, from Microsoft, and CrowdStrike. So it's not good for the industry, but there are some positive conversations we can have out of even events like that.
Sure. And I was gonna say, maybe you could speak a little bit deeper than my knowledge, but I know that there's kind of a big shift of, like you mentioned, Target. So Target got hacked because of one of their vendors got hacked and then got into the Target system. Can you explain a little bit about some of the significant changes in if we were Target and this happened today, it's that other company that's going to go bankrupt. It's not us that's on the hook for that cyber liability.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is cyber insurance has changed. There really wasn't cyber insurance back in 2013. We didn't have those kind of protections. Also, because of what we call supply chain risk, there is more awareness that any relationship that you sign on to somebody else and give them access into your network, you need to have very specific language built into that that says where the liability lies if an event occurs because of that access. So part of that is the Department of Defense since then has come out with what we're now calling CMMC, which is the Cyber Maturation Model Certification. And by 2026, every company that is part of the Department of Defense contracting business, whether as a contractor or a subcontractor, has to prove that they've passed some level of this maturation model. I think as this model becomes successful, and I do believe it will be successful, you're going to see other elements of the government adopt it, and you may even see it start to be adopted out in the common public, because I should have some sort of understanding or awareness of where you as a subcontractor sit with me in security. And I should have the expectation that you will do everything, your own due diligence to protect me. And I think that's where, when about 2015, 2016, the statistic was that 90% of companies, when they'd been hacked, did not notify any of their subcontractors or contractors that they've been hacked. That's a crazy number. Now with CMMC, there is a legal requirement for you to notify those customers. So I think we're going to see a maturation of policy and law, in addition to hopefully more of a maturation of how cybersecurity can be successful.
Yep. So just as we'll call it a sexy point in cybersecurity, I must ask, and obviously no names are required to be shared here, what is the most unique or most devastating ransomware attack that you've seen, that you've been a part of, and what was the outcome, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, the Colonial Pipeline was an interesting one. I was out of the bureau for that one. I think probably the biggest one that I worked was we had a company that pretty large company in Houston reported a ransomware attack, and I went out on the incident response. And as I started to do the interview with the CTO, CIO from that company, I realized that the attack was actually being launched by their MSP. So their MSP was not a US-based MSP. They had signed a contract with them, but this MSP had thwarted, in their words, a previous data breach and had asked for additional money because of the efforts they'd made. And then this particular ransomware attack was being launched by them in order to extort more money out of their customers. So that's a good example of how everybody who accesses your network, you have to understand that access that you're giving up. And whether it's an MSP, an MSSP, a security provider, whether it's CrowdStrike and a software, we saw CDK, which is a software product for car dealerships that went down over the summer. All of these, United Healthcare, right? United Healthcare gets hit because they don't have two-factor authentication on their remote logins. It comes down to basic blocking and tackling at some level. We have to understand that people are going to be hacked. And I actually heard it today. I'm up here in Philadelphia. People hack people. So ransomware or data breaches are most likely going to be caused by people clicking on something, people giving up information. And we have to recognize that and think about, what would we do if somebody was able to bypass our firewall, bypass our endpoint product, and launch an attack internal to our network. And so I think that's where security is starting to become more not perimeter based, right? So the days of just having a firewall and an endpoint need to go away. We need to have a much more robust, layered approach, including some, what we call zero trust product lines.
That was actually, I was just going to ask you. So zero trust is a great starting point. What other emerging technologies do you see, or are you, being, especially as a technologist, I'm curious, that companies are building out new product sets, or they're, hey, this is now a new threat. What are you seeing as far as emerging technologies in cybersecurity?
Yeah, the two biggest ones that I'm pretty bullish on is first, managed detection and response, or SOC as a service. One of the first questions I'll ask any customer is, who's managing your network 24/7? So most ransomware attacks are launched either on the weekend or on a holiday.
Mhm.
And so do you have somebody that's actually managing your network when you're not home? And that's a very specific question. The second one is so software-defined WANs, SD-WAN, is starting to move into that security line of what we call SASE. Uh, and I'm a huge SASE advocate. The SASE is actually a number of technologies that are incorporated in and lie over the top of a software-defined network. But one of the big ones is called Zero Trust Network Access. And so companies that have remote workforces, or companies that have many locations, how do you secure traffic between your remote worker and your primary business location, or between those satellite offices and that primary business location? So ZTNA actually manages those connections and analyzes the data that's passing between, and then has the ability to either stop that data, throttle that data, or send alerts into a SOC as a service to take appropriate action. So I think
Yeah.
SASE is starting to come into its own. There's a lot of great suppliers out there, and different options depending upon what you're looking for as a company.
Yeah. So this is probably my last question for you. Is, you mentioned the idea of, I think it's kind of the old school mentality of a lot of previous IT leaders, we'll call it a generation ago. I'm going to buy the product. I'm going to build a team. We're going to manage it. And depending on the size of the company, that can make sense.
Right.
I recently heard about a win where, I mean, even Apple is outsourcing a lot of their alerts and things like that, ingesting all that. Have you seen anyone in the last, we'll call it the last couple of years, really be successful at buying their own things to then manage? Or are you, in your your position as agnostic, product agnostic, vendor agnostic, really pushing people more towards, look, you should be evaluating a managed option versus a in-house option?
I mean, I'm pushing more towards the managed option, and the reason is just straight up manpower shortages. In order to stand up your own security operations center or a 24/7 operation, the number of bodies that you need and the financial input will be well over $500,000. And that's just to get started, not necessarily to manage over time. And so because of the dearth of cybersecurity talent is very well noted. I've heard numbers between 2 and 4 million shortages here in the United States alone. So I tell companies, why go through that whole process? Why go through this whole hiring thing when the loss of a single body could have a dramatic impact on your network? And so even companies like Southwest, United Airlines are starting to look at outsourcing some of those cybersecurity services. And that's what I tell people all the time. Security is different than IT. You can't take IT people and convert them into well, you can, but your IT people are responsible for that day-to-day operation of hardware, software, printers, those kind of things. So what I do is I tell companies, you have to separate security from IT, and you have to separate incident response from IT. Specialization does matter. And so I think companies are becoming more open to it. There's a huge marketplace out there. And I think people are really willing to at least have a conversation about how they can outsource some of that.
I've agreed in the various projects and conversations. It's just, you're trying to help them be in a better position than they were yesterday. And a lot of times, again, it's kind of old school mentality of like, well, I can build this and what have you. So appreciate the background there. As we do, we end on some sort of note around golf, just because, as I like to say, some of arguably our best, or not arguably, our ideal customer profile does include IT leaders that enjoy drinking and golf. So I'm going to ask you, what is your favorite golf course you've ever played, and
why? I'll actually do a two-parter. I lived in New Mexico for a long time, and there's some great golf courses out there. The Indian reservations around there have taken up some major golf courses, but there's a golf course, and I can't remember the name of it. It's on the east side of the Sandia Mountains, and it's a crazy, beautiful golf course, but it's spot golf. I mean, there is simply patches of grass with rocks and dirt in between, and so if you can't target golf, man, your ball.
Yeah.
And so I was at -12 that day. I lost 12 balls in a 18-hole period. So,
I don't
but
think that's
also
how golf scoring
I
works.
go up to sleep. So that on that day, that's how it went. I also play golf every year. There's a memorial golf tournament for my brother who is a firefighter in St. Louis, and so we go out and play Forest Park in the middle of St. Louis in the metropolitan there, and it's a beautiful golf course. They got some really good views of
Nice.
the art museum. But again, from my perspective, it's to remember my brother who was a huge golf player, and it's just a good charity. And it represents supporting not just firefighters but policemen in the city of St. Louis.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. I'll just mention, as we've been doing different events all over the U.S., we have been lucky enough to go play some pretty cool courses. One of which I can't remember what year, but they definitely hosted the U.S. Open. I'll share a photo, which is Chambers Bay outside of Seattle. It's a links course. We were talking about Scotland earlier, and this is
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Mark and I. Yeah, Mark's one of our client champions, and it's just an unbelievable. It actually used to be a garbage dump that the city rebuilt, and they built this unbelievable golf course over it. It's super cool, right on the bay, as you can see. You're seeing boats and ferries go around, and there's some very cool homes. But that was definitely one of the top courses I've ever played. So.
Love it.
So with that, James, again, you're one of our favorite educators. We really appreciate you jumping on the show for us and answering some questions. Again, to our listeners, viewers, if you have any questions you'd like to meet with James to talk about your situation in cybersecurity, he is available by contacting us here at Tech-Gofer. Like us, subscribe, share with your friends if you have other IT leader contacts that you think would benefit from our show. And outside of that, we will see you on the next one. James, thanks again.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.